Welcome to the EZCODE Projects series Padlock video number 3. In this video, we'll add action to our padlock. If you have not done so already, please complete the previous EZCODE Projects Padlock series videos. For those of you that have done so, let's begin. Let's open up the Padlock project directory in VS Code. Mine is in Projects. EZCODE Padlock. Open. Add the following HTML to the view HTML file right below our padlock div, but inside the view container div. So let's open up the view HTML. And what we're saying here is keep it in this div. So we have to find the bottom of it right there. And we're going to add some more HTML, which is pretty close to what we did before. So let's create a div and we're going to give it a class so we can hook into it actions, and we're going to open up this div and give it two sibling divs. But this time we're going to use something a bit different. It's another element of HTML and it's called a button. So let's open up a button, and a button has ways of manipulating, or it has properties that are already there, ready to go. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up an onClick property, and we're going to connect, if you remember, the EZCODE module that we created in the setup series, and we're going to put in a function that we have not created yet. And then I'm going to have a closing tag, and then inside the button we're going to name it. This is what we're going to see in the view. So I'm going to call this button unlock, and then what we're going to do is just copy paste another one here, and instead of doing unlock, actually now that I see it's incorrect on how I spelled this one, so it's unlock and lock. And then of course this one we're going to name, let's capitalize it, lock. So we should see two buttons. One is unlock and one is lock. Each one has an EZCODE function that has not been created yet. And now we're going to do what we always do when we create these things, and we're going to save. After we've saved, let's refresh the browser. Once again, we'll go back in here and find our view HTML file. Note how the two sibling elements of the view container class are now side by side. This is default behavior for the browser. I'm just going to open up the developer console while we have a chance here. We can also look here. We have our actions. We can see that the actions and padlock are side by side. So instead, let's stack them in a column. So let's go back to our style CSS. Let's open that up. And let's find our view container. So here's our view container from our beginning template. And we can change it because we're in our own padlock container now, and we don't interfere with the actual template when we make other projects. So that's great. Let's go back in here. We know we're display flex, so we'll just go down here and we'll say flex direction. And instead, we're going to do a column. And let's also create the actions. So we're going to go down to the bottom of our file now. We are out of the padlock area, so I'm just going to make a new line here for class actions that we created earlier. And for actions, we're going to do something very similar to all these. We're going to say display flex. Here as well, we're going to do a flex direction of a column. And we're going to give it a width of 100 px, which is similar to the padlock width. So now that we have that on there, we're going to influence the button by calling the element tag, not any class. We're going to say, hey, any button that exists inside the actions div, let's go ahead and we're going to give a width of 100%, which would equate to 100 px. If we change this, then it'll grow to whatever that is. and we're going to give it a margin on the top, and that's going to be 5px. So let's save our work and refresh the browser. So we're going to go ahead in here, and there. So we see what happened now is we took a flex column on this padlock. From the view container, we said anything in here that's directly a child of this container, and we're going to say stack them, which it did. Padlock and actions are now stacked. And then we said anything within actions, let's do the column as well and stack them. So now in the browser console, let's open the console up, not the elements side. And we're going to click either of the two buttons. So go ahead and pick one. I'm going to do the unlock. Both should give the same issue, which is it's an uncaught reference error. In this case, unlock is not a function. And if you clicked lock, it would be lock is not a function either. This is because we have not created our functions yet. So when we clicked the button, the browser tried to call a non-existent function. So let's open up the code.js file in VS Code. All right, let's go back there. Open up the code.js file. Now we're going to open up inside of this function, and we're going to say, hey, function unlock, curly braces. That's it. We're just going to create a function declaration. So I'm going to go down here and create a little bit of space. Tabs are your friend with this. I'm just going to tab it and say lock, enter, curly braces, and then add just one space down there. Keep your files neat from the beginning, and you're not going to run into issues later. So one more thing, if you remember that we did, was we created an IIFE, which was a function that is invoked immediately. And so doing that, it returns whatever is in this object. And that's how we encapsulate what we want to give the browser and what we don't. Some things we want to keep internally to our own module, and we don't want to let anyone else manipulate them or see them. So this is how we kind of hide those things. In this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this up, and since the words are the same, if you remember from before, we're just going to say unlock and lock, and that's just shorthand for the browser doing this for us. So now that we're here, okay, there we go. So what we want to do is move the clasp up and down a certain amount so that the lock appears to open and close. So to do that, we needed functions first. We're going to go ahead and save that work. Now, to do this, we need to add an ID to the HTML div. Now note, we already have a div with a class of clasp. So let's go to the view HTML real quick and look at that. We know we can get it this way. And if I happen to add another div here and I said get elements by class name or class, what would happen is it'd return all of them. And what happens with an ID is very specific to one thing. If we have one ID in here, so just keep in mind that if there's more than one ID of the same value, in this case we're going to say clasp, it's only going to find the first one. But every time we're always going to get one element back, not an array of elements. And that's what we want. So now that we have an ID of clasp, we can save our work. And let's play in the browser console to figure out our logic to open the padlock. So let's return back to, with our work saved, we're going to go back to the browser and we're going to refresh. And we have the console tab open. So in the browser console, let's try the following. So we're going to give a const clasp is what we're going to call it, equals document. Remember this from our load function we did during the setup. Get element by ID, that's what we just created. And we're going to enter. We can see our class element is now assigned to the const clasp. So if we just type out clasp, we can see there it is. We've grabbed the element that we put the ID on. And now let's see what the top of the clasp is. To do that, we're going to use a method given to us by the browser, and it's called getComputedStyle. Just like any function, we need the parentheses to invoke it, and it takes an argument, and that argument is the class or the element that you have a question about. So if I go ahead and hit enter, I can see there's a lot of data in here, and these are all pieces that are part of the computed element. So you can see the browser has a lot going on, but we don't want all that. We want just a little bit. And so if we hit the up arrow again, we get our query, and we can use dot notation to get into this object. And if I hit enter here, we can see it's currently set to auto, which is not what we want. We want a known px value. We have to do something special to the clasp. So let's go back to elements here. I have opened the padlock. I have the clasp selected, and we're going to add a few properties over here in the element style. So let's go there, and we're going to use position. Oops, spell it right there. Position absolute. Now, when we do that, we have another property to set, which we want the top to be 0. And we can see what's happened so far is the clasp is moving around a bit. Position absolute. You can see the top left corner of the clasp, if you remember, top left, top to right, or left to right, top to bottom. It started right there. And when we hit top 0, it took the actual clasp top 0 to the window. So we're going to keep adding just a few more things here. We're going to go over to padlock now. So we have position absolute top 0 for clasp. These are very important properties. You'll use them often. So just get to know them. Play around with them a little bit. Now what we can do is go to the parent container, which is padlock. And here we're going to set position relative. And when we do that, we say anything inside of this padlock container in respect to relative positioning. So that means the clasp is now once again in the 0, 0 position, or at least the top 0 position, absolute in regards to its parent, which is why we put relative there. Now we're going to go to the padlock still, and we're going to say display flex, and we're going to do align items flex end. And you might have seen one thing kind of happen is the body has disappeared. And what we're going to do is we're just going to put a width on the body to bring it back. And now it may look slightly different. If you know, before we had already set the centering of the clasp and everything else. That was our initial take at what to do. Now we want to move the clasp around. And to do that, the clasp itself is really at a different layer than the gold body. So we can note that our clasp margins are no longer working because we changed position to absolute. So let's go to the clasp. And since we know we have fixed widths and heights here, we can say, all right, clasp, let's start from the left at 10%. And if you remember when we were setting the margins, we had 20% to mess around with. So there was 10% on each side from previous videos, and we used margin right, margin left auto, which did that for us. Now we're specifically saying position is absolute, keep it at the top, and from the left, move it 10%. Okay, and now in the console, let's go there real quick. Let's set the clasp style top to -10%. So we're going to say clasp style top is now going to be equal to the string value of -10px. And let's go ahead and hit enter. And hey, it works. Let's now add our changes to our files before we move on. Type as I do, Pause the video or slow down the speed when needed. Let's return to our CSS, style.css sheet. Now we're going to find the clasp on line 23, and we're going to start putting in a few different things. So if you remember, we were absolute in the positioning. We were top 0. We'll just put PX on there, but you don't need it. We can put it on there just to keep it organized. And then we have a left at 10%, if you remember. The other thing we're going to do is we don't need the margin right and left anymore, if you remember. We're taking care of that with the left 10%. Let's delete those. And then let's go to the padlock, which is, all right, line 20 there in the padlock. And we set the position to relative. Great, it was there for us there. We're going to do a display flex. And we're going to do align items, which is a associative property of display flex. We're going to go flex end. And if you remember, then the body disappeared. So we have to go down to the body. And we're just going to do a width of 100%. And that should take care of the CSS that we were doing. Now we're going to, before getting onto this, we'll just save the work that we've done in the style.css. And let's move on to the JavaScript where we know we can do some code already. So let's go to the unlock function. So line 5 is there. We're going to tab over. And if you remember from the load function that we had done in the setup series and what we did in the console, what did we use to get a hold of the element, of the clasp element? Remember, we had an ID clasp. And then just like in the console, we said, you know, we're going to assign a variable or a constant in this case. And we use constants instead of a variable you might see let or var, where at runtime, the variable may change its value, where a constant doesn't, or at least we're telling the compiler, hey, you don't have to put so much memory or logic into controlling this variable. It's not going to change. So that's why we use const most of the time, because we're not going to change it. And we have a clasp that's going to remain the clasp that we're talking about. Now we're going to use the browser document, the DOM, the document object model, and we're going to use the methods that they have to get the element by ID. And we're going to pass in, of course, the clasp we had before. Now we have the clasp assigned to the clasp constant. And if you remember in the browser, we took the clasp, we dug down into its style, and in the style it has a top, and we said that's now going to equal a string of 10px. Now, what did we do? Well, that's what we did for the unlock. So we just have to invert this for the lock. So let's just do a copy and a paste, and we can get the clasp again. That's done. Same thing, not really changing. The only thing that's changing right now is the negative sign. So now we have a negative and we have a positive 10px. So let's save our work and refresh the browser. Click each button and see what happens. All right. We're going to try and unlock it. And there we go. We did get an unlock action. It moved up the clasp just as we thought. Let's see if lock works. And it does. So the clasp is higher than the body element of the padlock, which is why it's showing over the body. So let's go unlock again, and we're going lock. And you can see it's really using the starting position of 0 and going 10 up, and then starting position 10 down when we lock, which is fine once we hide this clasp behind the body. But since we went position absolute, it actually lifts it off the page a little bit, so it's at a higher area than the gold body. So in the style sheet, we're going to do a little tweak to this. So let's go back to the style.css sheet. We're going to go back down to body. And what we're going to do is put in a Z axis. So we have X and Y on the page. It's a two-dimensional X and Y type of board, but now we can have a Z axis, meaning we can go just like this. VS Code is above the browser right now. We're doing the same thing with the Padlock. All we have to do is actually set the Z index. This is another helpful property that you'll use with position absolute. And we're going to set it to 0 on the body. That's enough to specify that the clasp is now going to be behind it. So let's save our work. And we'll return to the browser and we'll refresh it. And let's try it again. We'll do an unlock and a lock and an unlock and a lock. So we can see it is behind the body right now. If we actually inspect this thing in the console and we said, let's turn this gold, a known color. We can also click on this. Google Chrome allows this here. And we have a color palette. We can do all sorts of different colors, and you can see there's a different designation for any color, and that's hexadecimal that you see here. That's why it says hex. There's a lot of different color variations. I don't know all of them. We do use RGB sometimes, and most of the time we use hex. So if you ever need a color and you find out what it is, here we can set the color palette, and here is the opacity, or you can it becomes transparent, all the way transparent, somewhat transparent for the color. And you can see it just adds on a few more characters onto the color to get that. So we'll go back to here just to show you an idea there. And if I wanted a different type of color, I could use this ink dropper. I could go over here and say, hey, I want that color right there to start with, and then mess around. So there's a lot you can do with colors. I just wanted to show you what that did, and I did want to leave that opaque. And we can see there's our lock, unlock once again. It's just hiding behind it. So now we've gone as far as we need to go. To reset this thing, we'll just go back there. Okay, so we added some buttons and actions and the code to activate the padlock to open and close. We can see when the clasp opens that there is a gap on both sides. Let's unlock that and show it, where we would expect one portion of the clasp to still be in the lock when it opens. That would be on the left or right side. One of the portions has to be inside of the body, or the clasp would just fall off the lock. So in the next video, we'll continue our work by fixing the clasp, adding some padlock bling, and cleaning up our logic to prepare for the new logic that will allow for a combination lock, as we stated in the beginning of the series. If you enjoyed this video, click like and then subscribe buttons to get notifications of new content. Thank you for exploring programming with me, and I'll see you in the next video.